In 1095, Pope Urban II decreed that the center of the known world, Jerusalem, should be freed from Muslim control. Spurred by religious fervor, warriors marched unabated across Europe towards the Holy Land, leaving death and devastation in their wake. In the end, upwards of 30,000 Muslims and Jews were massacred in Jerusalem alone. This was called a holy war. These were the Crusaders.
Shalom, hello again. Welcome to our series on the Crusaders. Why are we doing the Crusaders? The Crusaders were Christian armies, of course, that came out of Europe and attacked Israel starting at 1099 AD, 1,000 years ago or so, and fought with the Muslims. And we're covering them because we're fighting with the Muslims ourselves. And Osama bin Laden, for one, said that he urges the Muslims to, quote, liberate the Islamic world from the military occupation of the Crusaders. And we're supposed to know that our army, the coalition troops, etc., are Crusaders. Well, they're sort of like the Crusaders, and that's what we're going to cover in this series. Later in the program, we'll talk with Ra'anan Gissin, a senior advisor to Prime Minister Sharon. But for now, let's go to location in Israel at Caesarea. Well, our location is Caesarea on the Mediterranean coast of Israel, where a number of civilizations established a place for a harbor, a city, a trading post, and finally castles like the one behind me, fortified by the Crusaders for their adventures here in the Holy Land. And our subject is peace, something being talked about day after day, year after year, decade after decade in our time, peace in the Holy Land. Scripture indicates that it's hard to come by. 1 Thessalonians 5, for example, that when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child. It's difficult to get real peace here, evidently. Through the ages, there have been 7 grand efforts, even on God's part, for peace for all mankind. You might say, if you go all the way back to the start, I guess, was the flood, when God decided peace through eliminating unbelievers. And he saved Noah and his family only, and he went on from there. But shortly after in the Bible, you read about the Tower of Babel. And finally, at the end of that very chapter, Genesis 11, of Terah and the birth of Abraham. And now God turns to peace through a chosen people and a promised land. One people will be a blessing to all nations, and they will bring peace to the world, supposedly, if they'll do it well. This is 1,000 years, by the way. The flood is, give or take, in biblical years, 3,000 years before Christ, let's say. Abraham is 2,000 years before. At 1,000 years, you have King David, peace through strength and faith. His son Solomon built the temple. David established Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. That was some 3,000 years ago. Some people don't even recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel today, including the National Weather Service, by the way, when you read their capitals of Europe and their weather reports and so on, and capitals of the Middle East. But in any case, David established Jerusalem as the capital and built a kingdom where he pacified the borders, and there was strength and there was faith for a while. And then much fighting and warring and temple thrown down and so on. 1,000 years after David, you have the Messiah. Peace through changing men was his idea, and that works. Men who believe in Christ for their salvation are born-again believers. They never make war, not against anyone. Other kinds of people called Christians do, but born-again believers do not. They always love the Holy Land and the chosen people, and they are not fighters. They will not go to war except when the Lord will lead them against the Antichrist in Armageddon at the end. But in any case, Messiah's work among changing men has only claimed a remnant. And 1,000 years after Messiah, you had the Crusades. And that is why we're here at Caesarea. Behind me is a castle fortified by the Crusaders when they attacked here in the Holy Land. Their idea was peace through taking over the Promised Land, changing it to a Christian country, getting rid of the Muslims and, as a matter of fact, the Jews, who they really didn't appreciate as chosen people. And they did take the place over for a couple of centuries, and we're going to review that carefully. That's not the end of it, though. 1,000 years after the Crusades, I mean, give or take, comes our own time with Oslo and the roadmap and the various peace process and the people riding up with different ideas of how to make peace here. The same thing over again. Peace through dividing the Promised Land is the idea of the roadmap, or Oslo. Give half of it to the enemies of the chosen people, and that'll make peace. Well, it hasn't succeeded. None of those ideas have worked. And 1,000 years after our own time, that is, the Lord will come, he will start the kingdom. We will have the 1,000 years of relative peace. It still won't be totally peaceful, because even in the kingdom there's some unbelief. There's blood sacrifices at the temple because unbelievers come up to see God in accordance with Zechariah 14:16. They go to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles every year. And at the end of the 1,000-year reign, there is an invasion named for Gog and Magog in Revelation 19:20, where they ride up in one last mad attempt to try to wrest the Holy Land from the chosen people. That's not successful. God puts down that particular rebellion. And finally, the seventh idea, there have been seven: the flood, Abraham, David, the Messiah, the Crusades, our own Pax Americana, if you want to call it, or Western ideas of peace here. And here is the last and the seventh one: God will make a new heaven, a new earth, and a new Jerusalem. And we will finally have a period, eternity, of perfect peace, when, as Revelation 21 specifies, there will be, quote, no more tears. Back after this.
Ask for our free monthly newsletter, The Levitt Letter, and our catalog with videos, books, and music. Our correspondence course, the Institute of Jewish Christian Studies, includes reading packets, teaching cassettes, and mail-in tests. Did you know that Zola takes tours to Israel, Greece, and the Holy Land Experience theme park in Orlando, Florida? Please contact us for more information.
We have to understand the Crusades as particularly coming down on the chosen people. Now, they had been accused of deicide, which is the murder of God, so to speak, by the Europeans, right on since the gospel. Even though Jesus said, "For this was I born," and even though the Old Testament announces that he would come as a lamb to the slaughter, nevertheless, they are convicted of killing him. And this is said by Europeans, as I say, basically the Roman Catholics through the ages, but not by Arabs. Because, if the Muslim would say they killed God, then that would be admitting that Jesus Christ is God, and they don't exactly want to go that far. So that's, among all the accusations they put on the chosen people, that's not one of them. But they were murdered freely in Europe, I'm afraid. It leads up to the Crusades, because the Jews became very despised. In the 4th century in Italy, a synagogue was burned. There were probably more than that, but historically that's the first one we know. And it's such a shame that it's in Italy, because it was to the Romans who lived in the capital of Italy that Paul wrote Romans 1:16, the gospel goes to the Jew first and then the Gentile, or Romans 10:1, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is they might be saved, or Romans 11:1, I am an Israelite of the tribe of Benjamin, God hath not cast out his chosen people whom he foreknew. All of this is written to the Italians, and yet let me give credit to the Swiss, the French, English, everybody simply came down on the Jews in their time. The Muslims, when they came in here, began killing the chosen people, and they introduced the badge, the Code of Omar, their local law for this place, made the Jews wear badges to identify themselves as Jews. It's a reverse of the chosen people. They were chosen for derision, for taxation, for forced conversions. These badges reappeared in the 13th century in Europe, and finally with the Nazis, who made the Jewish people wear the yellow Star of David on their coats so they could be recognized wherever they went. The forced conversions have gone on through the ages too, in Spain after the Crusades, and so on throughout Europe. And you know, when I spoke in Ohio at a little Mennonite church, a Mennonite scholar acquainted me with the idea that perhaps many of the Mennonites in the Midwest, with the Jewish sounding names like Steiner and Berger and so forth, were originally Jewish people who fled persecutions in Germany and Switzerland. Many of them joined churches to act as Christians, raised their children in those churches. This was just for protection. It wasn't that they really had a clear belief, but little by little the Judaism got lost among the children and the grandchildren, and by the time they came over to America, they considered themselves biblical Christians, but in reality are chosen people. That and I have a theory that the more American Gentiles that know it really are descended from Jews, either the so-called lost tribes or other intermarriages and conversions, this sort of thing. God knows where every drop of Jewish blood is, and it sometimes appeals to me that some churches that care very deeply about Israel perhaps have a great many Jewish people in and don't even really know it. Anyhow, the attacks by the Muslims continued, and they continue now. I mean, this is in our present day, continually attacking the Jewish people with the teeth and with the tongue, killing them literally and talking obvious anti-Semitism, a very, very angry and unfair criticism of Judaism all the time. But the Crusaders came into that kind of a milieu. That when they came out of Europe, it was a time of killing the Jews because of their deicide, because they killed Christ, etc., etc. And the Crusades, that might have been a noble idea on paper, but perhaps it was done for more worldly reasons. Pope Urban II had the problem of European countries fighting with each other all the time, as they still do, and they were all Roman Catholics basically, and he wanted to unite them in some common purpose, so a crusade to the Holy Land would serve that purpose. He also had an idea to unify the Eastern and Western Catholics. The Eastern Catholics from the Byzantines onward were sort of their own church, and then the Roman Church was the Western side, and he wanted the two to become one strong church. It's pretty unclear whether that's ever been accomplished, but he thought perhaps the Crusades would accomplish that.
Explore the Bible. Experience Jerusalem. Find new life in the Jordan. Set sail in Galilee. Make your trip to Israel with Zola Levitt. For tour information, call 1-800-WONDERS. That's 1-800-966-3377.
Well, what about the individual knights in these Crusades? Were they sincere? Probably, some really were. It's no laughing matter to come from England or France all the way to the Holy Land back in those days. It's a difficult trip in some ways even today, but they came and they fought and they tried. But you know, there's also the reverse side. They received indulgences from the Catholic Church, remission of sins, freedom from debts, relief from civic charges, something like that. All kinds of persuasions, unreal, unspiritual, I should say. And in that manner, they are not unlike the terrorists of today, or the Palestinians, or the World Trade Center attackers, who believe they are receiving remissions of sins and this sort of thing when they attack and when they kill what they call the infidels, the chosen people, or the Americans, or whomever they may kill. There was that. And then some of these knights had debts that they owed to Jewish people in Europe. Why, that was relieved if they went in a crusade. Never mind the Jewish person that lent the money, he just didn't get paid, and the knight got freed from the debt. There were 3 crusades. I'm not going to attempt to describe them in detail other than how they affected this land and the Jewish people. The 12,000 Jewish people were killed en route in the first crusade. That is, once these armies got head of steam and started marching, why they just killed Jews wherever they found them. The idea being that Jews were guilty of deicide, they were going to go rescue the land of God, so they would kill them on the way. There were more killed in Israel on the second crusade. You know, to this day, the cross that these armies carried is absolutely forbidden in Israel. They don't use a plus sign in arithmetic because it looks too much like the cross. This is true of Muslims too, by the way. They asked the Swiss embassy to take their flag down because it has a cross on it, and they resent the cross. It just caused too many deaths, and it caused terrible attacks all over the Holy Land. There were attacks in the Second Crusade on Nazareth, on Safed, on Acre up the coast. And in the Third Crusade, by that time, and I'm talking about late 13th century or middle 13th century, the Europeans held an area along the coast very strong, from Tyre all the way down to Jaffa, that is from up in Lebanon to south of where Tel Aviv is today. But they eventually were routed. Arab soldiers with a much shorter supply line came on in great numbers and chased them back, castle to castle. They retreated northward up the coast. And in the end, those that could not find a ride out of here on ships tended to merge with the local people. I think they put on headdresses or whatever it took and took off their armor and wandered out into the societies. And to this day, you see red-headed and blonde children among the Arabs here particularly, who evidently go back to Crusaders. I mean, little kids with freckles and light complexions that evidently go back to a Crusader progenitor, because the Crusaders, with no retreat left to them, ships don't exactly pull up just when you need them, and when you're attacked, there's almost no choice, and they intermarried in the society and became Middle Easterners in a way. And the Third Crusade was the end of the idea. They did not succeed in taking the Holy Land away from those they called the infidels, any more than we've succeeded with our roadmap or our Oslo Agreement or anything else to take land away from the chosen people. What it comes down to, I guess, is this is God's country. This is not some political entity here. And for dividing it or changing the boundaries, history has proved that you get extinction. I mean, look, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, they were all extinct. The Crusaders came and went. The Arabs of today are they're coming on strong, but I don't think they will either survive to take this Holy Land. Of course not. The book of Amos tells us once that God has put his chosen people back in their promised land, he'll not remove them again. That's Amos 9:14 and 15, a very strong verse for the times. And so we're just looking at the remains of one of these fortified castles with its tremendous walls, its deep moats through which they intended to push seawater to defend themselves against the locals here. That didn't work. It certainly didn't bring peace. It brought nothing but murder. And it gave a bad name to Christians in the Middle East. It was already a rivalry between Islam, which in its time, to give it credit, was a successful society and a productive and intelligent society, and European Christianity, which was an upstart at the time. But it started more than a rivalry. It started a downright war, and that war's been on pretty much ever since. And we are seeing the results of it today as the Middle East turns around and crusades against the West, as in the attacks on Israel or on the World Trade Center or the various European capitals, and even in the Far East, where there's been Muslim terrorism against the rest of the world. The Muslim-Christian rivalry goes on. It didn't exactly start at the Crusades, but they didn't make it any better. And we are living in a kind of result of these ill-fated Crusades. Ra'anan Gissin was always very kind to us. When he was a colonel in the Israeli Defense Forces, he was a spokesman for that Israeli army, and he is well-spoken in English. and he has now risen to the level of the senior advisor and spokesman for the Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon. We went to the Knesset to talk with him. His office is there in the parliament of the country. That was quite a bit of security to get in there with our cameras and so on, but we passed through, and we were able to interview him. We began our conversation with the slant that the media takes about Israel. So on Fox News, which you have on in your office as we walked in, we have announcement like, here's a story from Iraq, here's a story from Egypt, now turning to the Middle East.
Right.
As if, I mean...
All these are like sideline stories, and the real story that is going on is this war, this conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, where there's no resolution. It's the conflict that all the other conflicts dwarf in comparison to it. This is the media's perspective. And if you talk to me, what is the most critical issue or critical conflict today going on, which has far-reaching implications for the stability of the region, stability of the world, I'd say Iran.
Well, yes.
And not this conflict, which is institutionalized, contained more or less. Yes. Yeah, there are problems that seem to be with no solution at the time, but intractable. But I think as we move along, we've seen that this conflict has changed and shaped, and we've moved a long way towards a solution in this conflict.
Yes, and casualty for casualty. Even now, day by day, there are more casualties among American troops or coalition troops in Iraq than there are civilians to terrorism here.
Well, you know, this is we've been fighting a war of terrorism for the past 3 years. It was imposed on us.
Yes.
Day and night. We had horrendous suicide bombing attacks. I think over 125 or 130 of them who succeeded to penetrate. Our casualty rate in the past three years has been 892. In comparable terms, in the United States, that will be akin to 49,000 men, women, and children killed in terroristic actions. We're a small country, so casualties are felt very deeply.
Yes.
We have whole families that were wiped out here. But, you know, the point is that, you know, other societies would have probably gone into despair, or you'd see them disintegrate. But there's something, not mystical, but something historical about the Jewish people that made it possible for them to survive for 4,000 years continuously after they've been persecuted and driven out of their land, and then had to suffer 65 years ago a Holocaust where 1/3 of our people were killed, and still, like the phoenix, we rise out of the ashes. So there's something to say. I don't know if I should describe it and say that maybe there is survival genes imprinted on our DNA code, which make us a resilient nation.
Well, the proof of the pudding is you and I talked more than a decade ago, and you said the same thing. You said at that time, I think you put it, our young people are exuberant, enthusiastic. The society is moving and generating, and it's proved, I guess.
I think you as a journalist, you travel around the world, and you see various people, different societies under anguish or conflict. And I think one of the best way to judge the resilience, the tenacity of the society, the vibrancy of it, is to look in the eyes of children. Now here, we've been under war for 3 years, but you see the bright hope in the eyes of children here. And if you look at children in Cambodia, for example, or in Vietnam, it's a dead look in their eye, you know? And this is a good indication about what the society is all about. Perhaps, you know, a visual indication. It's a vibrant society. And I would not deny that we have some degeneration of cells or part of our society which are degenerating and are not functioning as we want. There is a wide gap, a socioeconomic gap. We have serious problems, you know, with regard to what should be the definition of the state. Should it be a Jewish state or a state of all its citizens? You know, real critical issues that are being debated. But it's a vibrant society that where you see perhaps insoluble conflicts and the possibility of falling apart at the seams, you also see a regeneration of the society. And that regeneration comes about because of immigration that comes to Israel. About 1.2 million immigrants came from the former Soviet Union and from Ethiopia in less than 10 years. In other words, 12 years ago, we were 4 million Jews in this country. Yes. Now we are over 5.4 million, and altogether 6.5 million people live in this state. So with all those doomsayers that say, well, you know, Israel's falling apart at the seam, Israel has no future, eventually it's going to disintegrate or turn into a binational state, I just draw you to the statistics. In 1948 today, 55 years ago, there were only 600,000. And in the 30s, there were only 400,000 living here. And today, it's a society of 6.5 million people, a vibrant economy, people who are leading today in the high-tech industry, in medicine. We built a scientific and research institution. We revived the language that was 2,000 years dead, the Hebrew language, because we absorbed people coming from 102 countries speaking 82 different languages. Yes. So what language could they speak? One of the greatest achievements, I would say, was reviving the Hebrew language, which was the common language of these people coming from all different places around the world.
We'll have more from Chief Advisor Ra'anan Gissin on our next program. You know, an interesting thing he said was that Jewish survival in the land, he called it mystical survival. It's not precisely mystical, it's scriptural. The Bible is simply full of that. The entire future of both the believers and unbelievers is concerned with Israel in the land. The unbelievers want to get Israel out, and they'll even resort to Armageddon. The believers want to join Israel in the land, the believing Israelis in the kingdom to come, and we want to go in. And that's how the scripture is written. The Jews restored to the land, and there's nothing mystical about it. It needs some Bible reading, and it's understood completely. Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. If the tribulation's right around the corner, you know...
Would you like to hear more about the Jewish roots of Christianity, about prophecy, or the importance of Israel in the last days? For information as to how your church can schedule Zola for a personal speaking engagement, call 1-800-WONDERS. And you may also call toll-free for our colorful monthly newsletter, The Levitt Letter. This free publication includes Bible lessons, insightful news commentary, Hebrew lessons, and personal notes from Zola. Call 1-800-WONDERS. That's 1-800-966-3377. Or write to Zola, Box 12268, Dallas, Texas 75225. You can also see our Levitt letters, TV programs, and national airing schedule at www.levitt.com. Please remember, Zola Levitt Ministries depends on tax-deductible donations from viewers like you.